Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really critical topic, one of the most common infections globally, urinary tract infections, or UTIs.
Mm,
We're talking, what, an estimated 150 million symptomatic cases worldwide each year? It's huge.
it really is.
And for those of you in advanced practice, the challenge often isn't just spotting it right, it's picking the right medication, especially with antibiotic resistance becoming such a major headache.
Exactly. And that's where our source comes in, Chapter 28 of Pharmacotherapeutics for Advanced Practice. Our mission today is basically to distill those key therapeutic principles.
Okay.
The mechanisms, dosing, when not to use something, giving you a solid step-by-step guide based on the evidence. We'll even talk through those decision trees and drug tables so you could picture them.
Perfect. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. Just looking at the sheer prevalence, 50% to 60% of women experience at least one UTI in their lifetime.
Staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, and it peaks, apparently, in young, sexually active women, say 18 to 24. But interestingly, after age 60, the rates between men and women start to level out.
Right, which tells you it's not just about the classic anatomical differences later in life. Other factors really come into play.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty. How does this actually happen? The pathophysiology.
Well, the most common route, overwhelmingly, is ascension. Bacteria, usually the ones hanging out in your gut flora, make their way from the perineal area up the urethra and into the bladder.
Okay, sort of an upward migration.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And if the body's defenses aren't quite up to snuff, or if there's maybe a structural issue like reflux, those bugs can keep going right up into the kidneys. That's pyelonephritis.
And in terms of which bugs we're usually dealing with in the community, the chapter seems pretty focused, doesn't it? Not a huge cast of characters.
No, for uncomplicated UTIs, it's actually quite predictable. E. coli, Escherichia coli is the big one. We're talking about 85% to 90% of cases.
Yeah.
And then the other one you see, especially in younger women, is Staphylococcus saprophyticus, maybe 5 to 15%. Because it's so predictable, that's why we can often treat empirically, without waiting for cultures and straightforward cases.
It's interesting, though, the built-in defenses men have the longer urethra, drier environment, even antibacterial stuff in prostatic fluid.
Right. All factors that make them less prone. And that difference is exactly why the first step, the absolute critical thing before you even think about drugs, is classifying the infection.
You have to sort it out. Is this uncomplicated or complicated?
It's the pivot point for everything that follows. So uncomplicated UTI has a very strict definition. It happens in a premenopausal, sexually active, non-pregnant woman who hasn't had a UTI recently. That's it.
Got it. So if the patient doesn't fit neatly into that box.
Then you're automatically dealing with a complicated UTI. That includes men, postmenopausal women, pregnant women, anyone with kidney stones, catheters, neurologic issues affecting the bladder, or even just symptoms dragging on for more than a week.
Okay, and that leads to a really important clinical pearl you mentioned, bacteriuria in men.
Always considered abnormal, always classified as complicated.
Yeah.
It warrants a full workup and careful management. No exceptions there.
So moving on to diagnosis. How do we confirm it? Clinically, what are we looking for?
Well, clinically, you're often looking for any two classic symptoms. Things like fever, maybe sudden worsening of urinary urgency or frequency, that burning pain with urination, acute dysuria,
Right.
suprapubic tenderness, or that flank pain, the costovertebral angle or CVA tenderness.
And then lab confirmation.
Lab-wise, you're looking for a positive urine culture. Usually the threshold is 100,000 colony-forming units per milliliter or more, with ideally just one or maybe two types of bacteria. And you also want to see pyuria, which is white blood cells in the urine.
But the textbook points out, and this is key for workflow, right? For those truly uncomplicated cases in the right patient group, you might not even need the culture.
Exactly. Because the likely pathogen and its susceptibility are so predictable, it saves time, saves resources.
But there's always a but.
But if you suspect it's gone up to the kidneys pyelonephritis, or if it's any male patient or anyone else falling into that complicated category, then yes, pretreatment cultures are absolutely essential. You need that sensitivity data before starting, especially for longer treatment courses.
Makes sense, particularly with resistance being such an issue. Okay, so we've classified it, we've diagnosed it. What are the goals of therapy?
Pretty straightforward, really. Three main things. One, obviously kill the bacteria causing the trouble. Two, relieve the patient's symptoms, the pain, the urgency. And three, prevent it from getting worse, meaning stop it from ascending and becoming pyelonephritis.
All right, so let's talk first-line agents for that standard, run-of-the-mill, uncomplicated cystitis. What does the evidence say?
Okay, the guidelines really point to three main options, but the choice depends on things like local resistance patterns, which vary, plus patient allergies and cost, of course.
Number one.
The preferred first-line agent now is nitrofurantoin, specifically the monohydrate macrocrystals form. The usual dose is 100 milligrams twice a day for 5 days.
And why is it preferred?
It's got this really interesting mechanism. It's bactericidal, meaning it kills bacteria, and it does so by messing with multiple different biochemical processes inside the cell all at once.
Ah, like a multi-pronged attack.
Exactly. And that's thought to be why, kind of remarkably, resistance to nitrofurantoin has stayed pretty low over the years.
Yeah.
That makes it a really good choice from an antibiotic stewardship perspective.
That's a huge plus. So 5 days for nitrofurantoin. What's the next option?
That would be tmp-smz, trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole. Most people know it as Bactrim. This one's often a shorter course, just 3 days. Highly effective, but
Always a but.
yeah, it comes with some baggage. Resistance is definitely creeping up, hitting maybe 20% or even higher in some parts of the U.S. And you always have to ask about sulfam allergies because of the risk of rare but serious skin reactions.
Good point.
And another clinical tip. If your patient had Bactrim within the last, say, 6 months, you should probably avoid it this time around. There's a higher chance they might be carrying a resistant bug.
Okay. And the third option. Sounds like it wins on convenience.
That's fosfomycin, brand name Monorol. It's a single-dose therapy. Comes as a powder you mix with cold water and drink once.
One and done. Compliance must be great.
Absolutely. That's the big advantage. The downside, it tends to be quite a bit more expensive, and there's no generic version available, so often held back a bit because of cost.
Now, this duration thing is interesting. You said nitrofurantoin is 5 days, Bactrim is 3. Why the difference if we want short courses for compliance?
That's one of those nuances. The super short courses, like 1 to 3 days, really only work well for E. coli that's known to be susceptible, and typically when treated with drugs like Bactrim or maybe Fluoroquinolones, so we'll get to why those aren't first line anymore.
Right.
Nitrofurantoin, just based on how it works and how it concentrates, seems to need that full 5 to 7 days to really ensure a cure. And remember that distinction we made earlier. If you step into complicated territory, so postmenopausal women or any man, you're immediately looking at a longer course, typically 7 days, sometimes more.
Because of the higher risk of deeper infection or prostate involvement in men.
Exactly. And quickly, what about symptom relief while the antibiotics kick in? That braining can be intense.
Oh, yeah. That's where the urinary analgesics come in, right? Like phenazopyridine?
Yep, those also dyes. Phenazopyridine works fast to numb that bladder and urethral lining. Really takes the edge off the dysuria. But you absolutely have to warn patients.
The orange urine?
The bright orange urine. And it stains clothes, contacts, everything. Usually it's only needed for a couple of days, maybe 2 days max.
Important cautions with that one, too.
Definitely. Use it cautiously in pregnancy and lactation. And it's a definite no-go, contraindicated in anyone with significant renal insufficiency because it can build up and cause toxicity.
Okay, so that covers first line for uncomplicated. But what happens when things escalate, if first line isn't appropriate or if it's a more serious infection?
Right, that leads us to second-line choices and thinking about pyelonephritis. And this is where the fluoroquinolones often come back into the picture.
Like ciprofloxacin, levofloxacin. They used to be everywhere for UTIs.
They did, but they've really been pushed down the list for uncomplicated cystitis. Why? Well, rising resistance is one factor, but the big issue is the potential for significant side effects.
The black box warnings.
Exactly. The FDA has issued serious warnings about risks like tendinitis, tendon rupture, nerve damage, CNS effects, serious stuff. So because of that risk profile, they're generally reserved now.
Reserved for what situations then?
Second-line therapy for recurrent cystitis, maybe complicated UTIs, certainly for pyelonephritis, and for UTIs in men where you need good prostate penetration.
Okay, let's focus on pyelonephritis, then the kidney infection. Even if it's uncomplicated and treated outpatient, how does the approach change?
Big changes. First, duration immediately jumps up, usually 7 to 14 days, depending on the agent.
Right.
Second, remember we said cultures are mandatory before treatment? That's absolutely critical here.
And the drug choices?
For uncomplicated pyelonephritis treated orally, fluoroquinolones often become first line again because they get into the kidney tissue really well. So ciprofloxacin or levofloxacin. Or certain oral cephalosporins like cefixime or cepodoxime are also options.
What if someone can't take a fluoroquinolone? Allergies, other risks? What are the second-line choices for pyelo?
Then you might look at tmp-smz, but for a full 14-day course. Or amoxicillin clavulanate, also for 14 days. There's a little note in the chapter, though.
Uh-huh.
Oral beta-lactams, like the amoxicillin clavulanate, might be a bit less effective for pyelo on their own. Sometimes they're boosted with an initial single shot of intramuscular ceftriaxone to get things going.
And monitoring after pyelonephritis treatment?
Yeah, you definitely want to repeat the urine culture about 1 to 2 weeks after they finish the antibiotics to make sure it's cleared.
Yeah.
If the infection comes back, well, then you might be looking at much longer therapy, potentially 6 months or even a year.
Wow, okay. That's serious. Now let's shift gears to those special populations where UTI management gets even trickier, starting with older adults.
Right, geriatric patients. A big challenge here is that UTIs can often be asymptomatic or present atypically. Sometimes the only sign is a sudden change in mental status, confusion.
So you always have to keep UTI on the differential for altered mental status in the elderly.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And their risk is higher due to several factors.
Yeah.
Loss of estrogen's protective effects in postmenopausal women, maybe issues with incomplete bladder emptying, fecal incontinence, even changes in urine pH.
And there are specific drug considerations too, right? Something about nitrofurantoin.
Yes, very important. Nitrofurantoin is generally not recommended if an older adult's kidney function is significantly reduced, specifically if their creatinine clearance, CRCL, is below about 40 LMN.
Why is that?
Because with poor kidney function, the drug isn't cleared properly. It can build up systemically, increasing the risk of side effects like nerve damage or serious lung problems like pulmonary fibrosis. And because of the overall higher risk in this group, even uncomplicated UTIs are treated longer. 7 to 10 days for women, 10 to 14 days for men.
Interesting note about vaginal estrogen for postmenopausal women.
Yeah, the chapter mentions that topical vaginal estrogen therapy can actually be quite effective in reducing UTI recurrence in that population, likely by helping restore healthier vaginal flora and tissue integrity.
Okay, now pregnancy. This sounds like a high-stakes situation.
Extremely high stakes. Even asymptomatic bacteria in the urine without symptoms occurs in maybe 7% of pregnant women. If you don't treat it, the risk of it progressing to pyelonephritis is around 30%.
30%.
Yeah. And pyelonephritis in pregnancy is linked to really bad outcomes. Premature delivery, low birth weight, even stillbirth. So screening and treating bacteriuria in pregnancy is absolutely mandatory, even if the patient feels fine.
What are the go-to safe antibiotics during pregnancy?
Generally, penicillins like amoxicillin and cephalosporins like cephalexin are considered safe throughout pregnancy. Nitrofurantoin is okay, but only during the first and second trimesters. Avoid it near term. Sulfonamides, like in Bactrim, are also generally safe except in the last trimester due to a risk of causing jaundice, specifically kernicterus, in the newborn.
Got it. Okay, last special population, children. Diagnosis sounds like a real hurdle in the very young.
It is. Getting a clean urine sample is tough. Bag specimens are just not reliable, too much contamination risk. For an accurate diagnosis in infants and toddlers, you often need more invasive methods like putting in a small catheter, transurethral, or sometimes even a needle directly into the bladder, suprapubic aspiration.
Wow. Sounds stressful for everyone involved.
It can be. But prompt treatment is vital, especially in kids under 5, because UTIs at that age carry a significant risk of causing permanent kidney scarring, which can lead to long-term problems like high blood pressure or kidney disease later in life.
And the treatment choices for kids.
First line tends to be oral beta-lactams, again, things like amoxicillin clavulanate, augmentin, cephalexin, K-flex-cefpodoxim, or tmp-smz, Bactrim is also an option. Treatment courses are usually shorter, maybe 2 to 4 days, for uncomplicated cystitis.
Okay, so we've covered treatment. What about preventing it from coming back? Recurrence is pretty common, right?
It is. The overall recurrence rate is estimated around 20%. If a patient is having frequent trouble, say 3 or more symptomatic UTIs within a year, then starting prophylactic or preventative therapy is usually recommended.
And what does that prophylaxis look like?
There are a couple of main strategies. One is continuous prophylaxis, where the patient takes a low dose of an antibiotic every day or maybe 3 times a week. Something like a low dose of tmp-smz is common.
Okay.
The other approach, particularly for women who notice their UTIs are clearly linked to sexual activity, is postcoital prophylaxis. They just take a single dose of an antibiotic right after intercourse. Both can be very effective.
Beyond pills, what about lifestyle advice? Patient education must be key here.
Absolutely. Simple things can make a difference. For sexually active women, the advice is always to urinate shortly after intercourse to help flush out any bacteria that might have entered the urethra.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Yeah, techniques like double voiding urinating, waiting a minute, then trying again, or even changing positions while voiding can help ensure the bladder empties completely. reducing residual urine where bacteria can multiply. And another big one is advising against using spermicides for contraception, especially those containing non-oxynol 9,
Why spermicides?
because they can disrupt the normal, healthy vaginal flora, killing off the good lactobacillus bacteria. That disruption can actually make it easier for E. coli to take hold and cause a UTI.
Interesting connection. Now, what about complementary or alternative approaches? People always ask about cranberry juice.
Ah, yes, cranberry. It's probably the most studied alternative option. There is some evidence supporting it. The idea isn't that it kills bacteria, but that compounds in cranberries, called proanthocyanidins, have anti-adherence properties.
Meaning, they make it harder for E. coli to stick to the walls of the urinary tract.
Exactly. Makes them easier to flush out. For it to potentially work, though, you need a decent concentration. The chapter suggests things like 8 to 16 ounces of a juice that's at least 30% cranberry, or taking concentrate capsules, maybe 300, 400 milligrams twice a day.
Any other alternative options mentioned?
Probiotics, specifically lactobacillus strains, are also discussed. The thinking is similar to the spermicide issue. Restoring a healthy vaginal flora might help prevent colonization by UTI-causing bacteria like E. coli. And just circling back briefly to symptom management.
Right, the pain and fever.
The chapter does note that standard over-the-counter NSAIDs, like ibuprofen, are perfectly appropriate for managing the discomfort and fever associated with UTI while waiting for the antibiotics to work.
Okay, great. This has been incredibly comprehensive. Let's try to boil it down to the absolute key takeaways for someone listening.
Sounds good.
All right, takeaway number one for me has to be that initial classification. Getting it right is this uncomplicated or complicated. Literally sets the entire treatment path.
Absolutely fundamental. And second, for uncomplicated cystitis, nitrofurantoin is really positioned as the go-to first-line agent now.
Yeah.
Remember that 5-day course minimum, and its big advantage is that low resistance profile, which is great for antibiotic stewardship.
And the flip side of that stewardship coin
Is being really careful with the other agents. Recognizing the rising resistance to Bactrim, maybe hitting 20%, and reserving those Fluoroquinolones mainly for complicated infections or pyelonephritis because of their significant side effect risks.
Which really brings us to a final thought, doesn't it? About being responsible prescribers.
It does. I mean, these high resistance rates aren't just abstract numbers. They represent real challenges in treating patients effectively. So being judicious, really sticking to the guidelines based on whether an infection is complicated or uncomplicated. It's not just good practice. It's essential for preserving the effectiveness of the antibiotics we still have left.
A crucial point to end on. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that detail. My pleasure. And to everyone listening, we really hope this deep dive into UTI pharmacotherapeutics was helpful. We wish you the very best in your studies and your clinical practice. Thanks for being part of the deep dive.